Hello and welcome to another episode of Nothing Ventured with me, Aarish Shah. Today, I am incredibly excited to have with me in the studio Meryem Arik. Miriam co-founded and runs Doubleword, an inference lab that sells tokens from open source models and operates a purpose-built, high-throughput inference API aiming to solve the cost of token problem. She and her co-founders began as physicists and started working on inference about 6 months before ChatGPT. Doubleword produces some of the cheapest tokens on the market, and the team chose to build the company in London, whilst many competitors were in San Francisco. Before Doubleword, she started her career at Barclays in London as a derivative structurer. She studied physics and philosophy at Oxford, was named to Forbes 30 Under 30 for AI infrastructure, and speaks regularly at conferences including TEDx and QCon. In today's episode, we talk about why token prices are going to have to go up, but not what you think.
Clearly, token prices are going to have to go up because all of these companies are losing money, and so at some point they're going to have to stop subsidizing their tokens.
How we are in an AI bottleneck and will be for a while.
I think the bottleneck is very much now.
How if closed models cost 8 to 10x more than open source, what is stopping you from moving?
Using an open model on my platform Doubleword versus the same intelligence, it's about 8 to 10 times cheaper.
How it would be disingenuous to suggest that we are going to build a foundational model in the UK.
I don't think it's the right game to be playing to build a general foundation model.
Why sovereign inference is far more important than you might think.
There's been a lot of discourse saying that in order to get really sovereign AI, we need to be able to train a British foundation model. And I don't think that is actually what we need to do.
And is Macron Mistral's highest performing BDR?
Emmanuel Macron is Mistral's highest performing BDR.
Can we get Gen Z enthusiastic in embracing AI? And finally, have we swapped the infinite scroll for infinite rabbit holes?
Social media, we let loose on an entire population or an entire generation without understanding how bad it was.
Let's get straight into it. Hi guys, whilst I've got you for a second, I thought I'd reintroduce myself. My name's Aarish. I'm the host of Nothing Ventured, the podcast where I talk to the people behind the stories that make the venture ecosystem go round. I'm also the founder of Emerge One, a consultancy that provides fractional CFO support to venture-backed tech startups from seed to Series B and beyond. If you enjoy the podcast, I would really appreciate it if you could like, subscribe, and comment wherever it is that you listen. And of course, if you want to talk to me about anything, do reach out on LinkedIn or on X. I'm always up for a bit of a natter. Right, let's get back into it. Miriam, thank you so much for being here today on this sweltering hot day in it. You know, I feel like saying July, August, but it's May somehow or the other, and it is almost 30 degrees outside. But thank you for making the trek out to the sticks in Mill Hill.
No, I mean, as I said when I walked in, I haven't been to Mill Hill since I was 14 years old doing an internship at the Mill Hill Observatory. Okay. And so it's very exciting to be back.
Shout out to Mill Hill. We always love a local story. But look, let's go. We've got a huge amount to cover, I think, in this pod. The thing that is incredible, in the world that we're living in is obviously all of the technology that we're using is moving at pace. Over the last couple of months, we've had this real kind of explosion of, or reckoning, I guess you could even call it, where companies are now seeing that their token utilization has really kind of blown out of control. Uber, we were talking about, has utilized all of its tokens for the year and it's only May. But let's talk about inference in terms of token economics and GPU economics, right? So you have said that tokens are not subsidized and that training costs are what drive platform losses. So if token prices have to rise, how should buyers trade off access versus costs, and which adoption failure modes hit hobbyists, of which I would certainly include myself, enterprises, or your token selling business first?
So there was a lot of discourse about how, clearly token prices are going to have to go up because all of these companies are losing money, and so at some point they're going to have to stop subsidizing their tokens. When I say all these companies, I'm referring to the model lab. So people looked at Anthropic and OpenAI and they say, well, they're losing money. Clearly they're going to have to raise their token prices at some point. Now, I think it's probably the case, in fact, it's definitely the case, that they're actually not losing money on inference. In terms of actually running the model and selling the model for a particular customer, they make more money on inference, then they lose.
So just before we get deeper into it, can you explain inference to those who maybe aren't initiated?
So AI broadly has two phases where we use compute. It's blurring a little bit because of RL, but I'll ignore that. So you have the training phase. So this phase where I'm actually training a model to be smart. And then I have this process of inference of once I have a smart model, how do I actually use the model? So like running the model on GPUs and using the model is the process of inference. Now, the kind of key insight that we made when we first started the company is at the time, everyone was really concerned about the cost of training. The bet that we made is, because it was early days and everyone was spending all their money on training. The bet that we made is if this training goes well, training is no longer
the cost of training will just naturally decrease over time because there's
relative to the inference cost. Exactly. Yeah. So we were just like, if training goes well, the thing that actually matters is inference because I train this model once, but I inference it maybe for a year or 2 years. And so everyone used to be very concerned with the cost of training, and training is very, very expensive for these big labs. But going back to, do they make or lose money on inference? The big labs probably make a lot of money on inference. The thing that they lose money on is that training is so expensive.
Right. And on the inference side, that is literally me, running a prompt on Claude or whatever, right?
Yeah, using ChatGPT or whatever. Every time you send a message and get a response back, that's the process of inference.
Yeah.
And we measure inference in terms of tokens. So I'll talk a lot about tokens. You can think of tokens as like a subword. So you can largely think of it as correlated to the number of words that you send it and the number of words you get back.
Yeah, it's like a phoneme, right? Like it's the smallest next bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But what's super interesting to me, right? Because I've been thinking about this a lot in terms of my use of these models and AI in general, et cetera, right? Is because at the moment they don't price per token, right? Like APIs price per token, but like if you are just a general consumer of ChatGPT, let's use as an example, right? You can buy whatever it is, the basic for $20 and the pro for $200 a month. But it doesn't feel like there's any limit on your inference utilization or your token utilization. There is, because the context window essentially collapses after a certain a certain length of conversation or amount of data that you're putting into the chat. So to me, because it isn't directly linked to the number of tokens you're using, I was kind of sat there thinking, well, this feels like a SaaS model, but it's going to need to move to a usage-based model. So is it more relevant for the kind of API usage side of things, or is it more relevant for the general kind of chat side of things?
So when it comes to the costs that Anthropic and OpenAI have to deal with, they deal with it in terms of kind of tokens. And so whether they're packaging it up, so the way that you can think of like ChatGPT is they've essentially just bundled a number of tokens and they're selling you a bundle of tokens.
This is your bundle, yeah.
And you might have noticed, especially if you use Claude, you get rate limited quite frequently.
All the time.
Exactly. And that's essentially them saying you're kind of hitting the limit of what this bundle buys you.
Yeah.
And so, I think they probably were, for some users, they were losing a lot of money, but for the majority of users for a while, the $20 they were kind of getting from these customers was more than the amount of tokens that they were producing. We started seeing some of these labs, especially Claude, over the last month or two, because Anthropic has been incredibly compute constrained, starting to restrict what you can use their subscription for.
Interesting.
And so, for example, you used to be able to use like OpenClaw with the subscription, and used to be able to use like
that now,
Claude Code much more aggressively with the subscription, and now you have to move to usage based. But the way that I would think about this $20 or $200 is more of like buying a bundle of tokens as opposed to, it's completely free of tokens itself.
I think it also really depends on how you are using the products, right? So I use, APIs for the workflows that I built. So those are being charged on a per token basis, essentially. But I equally use all of the models one way or the other than, well, there's a couple that I don't use, but I use all of the models one way or the other for conversational kind of like, just thinking through stuff. And I think, I think what's super interesting to me is, there was a meme that was going around I think last month, where 84% of the world is not using AI in any way, shape, or form, or it was 83% maybe. Of the balance, like only 0.1% are actually paying for AI, right? So it is still a very, very small proportion of the world of consumers that are both using and paying for AI. But obviously, as because we haven't yet crossed the chasm, I think, right? Like, even though it feels like we have, I think we're in a bubble to an extent. As it becomes more adopted by kind of the mass public, right? Like, that's when it potentially becomes a bigger issue unless they solve the scaling problems, right? Like, as part of this is also the GPU kind of issue, right? So talk about that for a second.
Yeah, so there's kind of a lot of different kind of streams that are going on simultaneously to try and solve this problem of how do we scale AI to the world. Kind of the layer that I operate at is the software layer of how can we make inference software that allows these models to run more efficiently on GPUs. You also have NVIDIA, Cerebras, a bunch of other kind of chip providers working on the next generation of chips that are going to, for a fixed amount of power, be able to produce way, way more tokens. And then you have this problem of like scaling out as well. So like, how can we build more data centers? How can we produce more of the chips? And all of these are happening simultaneously. And there was a long while where you used the word bubble, but people were using the term bubble in terms of like financial bubble. Like,
sure.
are we in an AI bubble?
Yeah.
And I think
I think the jury's still out on that, but yeah.
I was on the bubble side, and now I'm very much not on the bubble side.
Well, it depends. Okay, so it depends on the definition of what type of bubble. Are we in a AI usage bubble, or are we in a AI valuation bubble?
Sure. I think there's a lot of companies that are overvalued.
Yeah.
But I also think we're going to see a lot of companies valued at in 10 years' times at numbers we can't even imagine.
So I had the founder of Emergent on, right?
Sure.
They built essentially a lovable type business, but out of India. Co-founders are Google and ex Amazon brothers. So they basically built it to build production ready apps, right? And his take was, I think we're all vastly undervalued. I mean, obviously he's going to say that to an extent, but you understand the logic of what he's saying, because he goes, how do you value a business where literally, you don't have trailing 12 months, right? Like we don't know. This is an entirely not just new category, but new economy that is being built. I mean, obviously there are people out there now trying to build the payment rails for an agentic economy, right? Where it's no longer humans paying for AI or for compute. It's agents trading, but also trading their skill sets amongst themselves. I'm like, there's all sorts of things that could arise out of this that we just have no thought, no thinking about it at the moment.
But when you mention like how early we are in terms of like the number of people actually using AI really seriously, it's so small. Yeah. And assuming that that's going to continue to grow, given how productive this technology seems to be, we need to build so many data centers. We need to produce so many chips. We need to produce the next generation of chips. We need to produce models that are way more efficient. And we need to build inference software that is also more efficient.
And we need to reduce the cost of energy.
We need to massively reduce the cost of energy. And we need to do all of these to even hope to get close to meeting the demand that I think we're going to see in the next 10 years.
Yeah. We're going to talk about it from a kind of UK perspective as well. But I think this is like one of the real challenges that we face in the country, because both building is really difficult in this country for lots of reasons, but the cost of it, we have the highest cost of energy like in Europe, right? Because we are pegged to the most expensive type of energy, LNG or gas. But going back to the kind of, so if I would take myself as an example, right? I would say I'm both a hobbyist, but also I use it within my work for various things. But I'm not building, an agentic business as such, right? Whereas some of our clients are building, one of the clients we're hopefully going to work with relatively soon has built 49 agents, to deal with the particular problem that they're solving, right? So how should they be thinking about this whole question of token consumption, cost, efficiency, et cetera, et cetera? Like, where do you see this Do you think, well, and given what you just said, do you think there's going to be a bit of a bottleneck approaching us in terms of all of these issues, given how difficult it is to build out the data centers, the chips, et cetera, et cetera?
I think the bottleneck is like very much now.
Okay.
And this is a very recent phenomenon. So essentially it was since December, roughly December, that the models became good enough that you could run them for really prolonged periods of time in like properly agentic independent ways. So that was roughly since December, and we've had a couple generations of models come out since December that have been able to run for even longer periods of time independently. And so that's happened, and people have started, it's been mainly in agentic coding, but we've seen actually across different use cases as well, that people are just using orders of magnitude more tokens than they were this time last year.
Sure.
And it's getting to a point, like I would say about a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, was the first time that I had with customers where they were coming to us mainly because of token cost. And it was token cost that was really, really driving them because, you know,
because their consumption had increased.
Because their consumption had just increased so much.
Yeah.
And these are companies that if they could increase their consumption by another 5x or 10x, they probably would.
Yeah.
And it's also probably not appreciated that if Anthropic doubled their pricing, I don't think that they would see a slow in demand.
No, I don't think they would see drop off at all.
And so you kind of have all of this moving together, and it's moving so quickly. There's no reason to think that the jump that we've seen over the last 2 months won't happen again in another 2 months.
Yeah.
And that's part of what's causing GPU prices to get so expensive as well. So GPU prices have doubled in 3 months.
Yeah.
Largely that's because Anthropic have realized they don't have enough compute to support demand. And so they're buying up all of the GPUs everywhere. And so all of this coming together is making it such that even if people could pay, that they can't get access to enough tokens that they need at the rate limits they need.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, for a lot of use cases, their use cases are just becoming unsustainable or non-economical. And this is just happening like very quickly. There's a lot of GPUs coming online, however, in H2.
Yeah.
And so we are expecting a lot more supply coming in the second half of the year. I'm almost certain all of that will be bought up by Anthropic in about 30 seconds.
Yeah, sure.
And so I don't think that this problem is going to get any easier. Semi-Analysis, who are probably the world's leading kind of GPU and kind of semiconductor analysts in the space, they expect kind of continued increase of prices for all of these GPUs and rentals.
So the way I would look at it, right, is if I think through the last several months, what you had was, you know, Claude Code and Claude Cowork coming onto the scene. Like, and you know, if you look back to, you know, those far off days of January, like if you went on X, Gemini was the winner, right? According to everyone. And then in March, Anthropic had like essentially just displaced everything. And what I've been seeing, like, and, you know, I work in finance, you know, with startups, we've seen CFOs or FDs or whatever, like finance professionals, like literally spending weeks on Claude Code building out applications, right? Like now, and some of those applications are derivative or they are just replications, you know, replicas of what already exists, but they built them themselves, right? And I think what's happened is you've got these professional hobbyists almost who are now consuming huge amounts more than they previously were, and businesses that are built on AI rails, if I can put it that way, are obviously, you know, exploiting it more and more and more and more. I had a cousin who was in the US for his son's graduation, and one of the large consultancy firms, you know, there was someone there from one of the large consultancy firms, and, you know, they turned around, we are not going to be hiring any more junior analysts, that intake will stop. We're sacking all the junior people that we already have, because we're just going to move that all onto kind of agentic or AI rails. And that just means, like, if you think about what that really means, it means all of that combined work that was being done by, call it 1,000, 2,000, whatever the number is, right? But across the globe, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people is going to be replaced with agentic or AI-driven workflows. And that's going to require tokens and compute, which maybe haven't been used. Like, they may have been testing till now, but they haven't actually released the throttle and just let it go.
I think, so much of the token consumption right now is actually not in production token consumption. And so this will just continue to grow by that. I think something that I think is not talked about enough when we talk about token cost is although tokens are pretty expensive, they're actually incredibly cheap considering the amount of work you can get done.
About $2 for like, I think Gemini's top model, it's something like $2.50 for 1 million tokens.
And so like, let's think about what you can build with that. So your friend who, let's say, is a non-technical finance person.
Or me, yeah.
And that can build a piece of software that otherwise they might be paying a 60 quid a month subscription for.
Yep.
They probably spend maybe 50 quid on tokens or maybe even 10 quid on tokens.
Or even 1,000.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Well, but like the amount of money that it cost him to build that software is probably way, 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 way less than if he was buying it or doing something else. And so actually tokens are expensive, you know, compared
in the moment.
Yeah. But actually the amount of productivity that you can get compared with the way we were doing things in the old ways, they're actually very, very cheap for like units of work done.
Yeah.
And that's obviously changing calculations of like how you think of what work do people do versus not do?
Yeah,
like what do we buy versus
it's
build?
output versus time, right? Like I think that's where you get to. I mean, like, so to use a really simple example to kind of describe that, right? Like, so today, you know, if we build a financial model and it takes 4 days, we charge 4 days worth of time, right? As yet, it is not possible, and I know you and I have talked about this before, it is not possible to build a financial model, a financial operating model in the way that we would build it using AI. It can kind of get somewhat there, but not really. It can build really great investment banking type models. But let's say that in 6 months or a year or whatever, it is able to build a model of that nature. It still requires that kind of human knowledge of what are the assumptions that need to go behind that, or what is the underlying data. But now it only takes a day, let's say, or half a day, right? Is that model worth any less because less time has gone into it? Or actually, is it worth more because less time has gone into it, you've got it immediately, and you know you can update it in multiple ways, right? Like I think we're going to see a shift in how we value, or you know, what it is that we value and what we pay for. I've always been a proponent that time-based models are absolutely stupid, because it should not be. If I can do a job quicker than the next guy or the next girl, why should I be on the same, on the same salary or whatever?
No, I think a lot of people resent time-based models. People hate, like, you know, lawyers, billable hours, etc. for a reason. And so we're going to have to figure out how we charge these things. My hope is that the financial model becomes much, much, much cheaper, and that actually more people are able to like work with you.
Participate,
That's my hope. And I think that's my hope for like law as well. I think like law is incredibly expensive because it's done by billable hours. If, for example, we can get the same unit of work done in 20 minutes, that unit of work should become way cheaper, and actually we just get to do more of it. And that's my hope.
It's by lowering the cost of supply, you increase demand. Essentially, is what it is, right? Like
that's my hope.
Yeah. I definitely see that. I also see some other issues. I mean, the biggest issue that I see, and this is going on to a completely like left field, a random topic, but I have talked about it before. I think the problem is in some of these industries, whether it's law, whether it's sort of finance, accounting, etc., you're seeing fewer and fewer people. Well, certainly in accounting, you're seeing fewer people already kind of deciding to go down the track of qualifying. And if you then add on to that kind of, you know, firms basically saying, well, actually, we're just not going to train as many people because we can now do a lot of this stuff with agents. What you essentially end up with potentially in 10, 20 years time is you do not have enough people that have gone through and learnt to kind of sit at the strategic level, which is where the real value is. And you become over-reliant kind of on potentially the models or the AI to do the work. So I think we also need to figure out how that works, right? Because you still want a world, I think, and I certainly believe this in terms of the work we do, where human judgment is still, you know, the sign-off. Because I think if you outsource everything to the model, you don't know what's gone behind that. And you know, I always say, you know, who would you rather have in your boardroom, a black box or a human being? And I think for the time being, it's a human being. That may change.
I don't know. I think a company called DataIQ did a study where they surveyed CEOs, and the majority of CEOs said that AI gave better advice than their board members.
But maybe they're non-execs. Like as a CFO, I would hope that my advice would be better than Claude.
But I do get the point. I think there's the problem of like accountability is going to become a very, very important one. And how we drive accountability when actually that person who's accountable probably doesn't know everything that's gone on underneath the hood.
Exactly.
Is going to be like a really interesting question.
Yeah. And also, like, how do you we talked about training, the cost of training. It is impossible to capture everything that happens in a business, right? Like, so you and I have had 3 or 4 conversations since we first met. None of that was recorded, right? None of that was, I didn't have granola running, I'm pretty sure. Well, no, some of it was, but like, you know, the conversation when we first met definitely was not recorded, right? And so much of that kind of higher value work, I think, happens outside of the room and outside of places where AI is going to capture everything, and you wouldn't want it capturing everything as well. So I think, you know, for me, there is this whole question, accountability, absolutely, but also context, right? Like, I think you cannot necessarily give AI all the context that you have. It doesn't get communicated in an email or in your notes or even in a meeting transcript to the extent that in the real world, as human beings, we would give context to one another. And that kind of leads on actually to an interesting, slightly kind of correlated question, which is around open versus closed models, right? So closed models are presented very often as necessary despite large kind of price gaps and a shrinking intelligence difference. So when does choosing a closed API at 8 to 10 times the cost make strategic sense for a company? And what capabilities or sovereignty do they forfeit by doing so? So i.e., when should they either move from closed to open or back again?
Yeah. So to give a bit of context, the labs that we were talking about, Anthropic and OpenAI, they mainly do closed models.
Yep.
What that means is I can only use their model if I'm like paying them directly. Now, there's a whole bunch of like open source models, which I can just take the model and deploy it wherever I want.
Most famous out of China.
Exactly. China is going very, very heavily on this strategy. The US has like Google has a bit, but it's mainly Chinese models.
And by the way, I was talking to someone about this, and the thinking is that the Chinese have basically, the reason they've gone down the open source route is because essentially China, the state, has said, let's get AI into as many hands as possible. Let's just get everyone using it.
Yeah, I don't know exactly why they've done it, but like geopolitically, I think it's made them a lot of friends. Yeah. I think, you know, I definitely have probably subconsciously a much more positive opinion of China since like I'm working with their models all the time.
I've always had a positive opinion.
Okay. I've never been, and so I can't say to have
you should go.
Informed
It's
opinion.
Incredible place, yeah.
So like you can take these open models now, just because they are Chinese origin doesn't mean you need to like send your data to China. You can deploy them, you know, in British data centers or American data centers. You can use them. Most of the models we offer are Chinese, for example. Now, when you're using these proprietary model, these closed models, OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., for the same intelligence, so if I look at the same intelligence level, the amount that I'm going to pay Anthropic or OpenAI is about 8 to 10 times higher for the exact same intelligence level.
As compared to the open source.
As compared to an open source model. Yeah. So, for example, using an open model on my platform, Doubleword, versus the same intelligence, it's about 8 to 10 times cheaper. Now, the difference... So if you're not using, let's say, the model that came out last week, and you're instead using the model that came out 3 months ago or 4 months ago, there's probably a same intelligence model that you can use that's 10 times cheaper, delivered through an open provider instead. The difference comes in terms of when you look at the frontier. Yeah. So the proprietary model providers, so OpenAI and Anthropic, they tend to have slightly better models than the open source models.
Is that down to the training? Is that down to, what is that down to?
Well, I think the labs have a lot more compute. There's like export controls when it comes to compute. And they also just have phenomenal teams, and they're very much at the frontier. When it comes to like innovation on better model quality, the proprietary model providers win. I also think it's like a difference in focus. So the American labs, they see their goal as creating AGI. They see their goal as like creating a godlike intelligence form. Yeah. That's not how the Chinese labs see it.
Yeah, exactly.
The Chinese labs see it as, how do I, for example, make this really useful, make it useful to a lot of different people. They're very good at, you know, taking an intelligence level and making it kind of smaller
practical
and cheaper.
As opposed to like theoretical.
Yeah, and so like the Americans are really swinging for the fences, we're going to get AGI. The Chinese are actually like, you know, if the model quality stays the same, like how can we deploy it as widely as possible? Yeah. And that's why you get this difference. So the American labs labs focusing on this frontier, they're typically about 3 months ahead of the open models. This was a really, really big deal a year ago or 2 years ago, when it was more like 6 to 12 months gap between them. Because every 6 to 12 months, you were getting really, really big performance improvements. And so the difference between a model now and a model 6 months ago is really, really big. Now, for the majority of use cases, the difference in what you can do with a model now and a model 3 months ago.
Yeah, it's diminishing returns.
It's diminishing returns. And it's not that the model's not more capable, because the model is more capable, but actually people don't know how to use that extra capability yet.
Sure, got it.
And so actually, for the majority of use cases you're trying to do, your open model is almost certainly good enough, and it's like 8 to 10 times cheaper. And so if you're actually deploying at any reasonable scale where you start thinking about token cost, open models are a very smart thing to look at when you're pushing the frontier of like what is possible to do with models. You want to use a closed model.
Do you think there will come a time where the kind of proprietary Anthropic, etc., will actually move to open source, or at the very least provide an option of open source, which is maybe slightly deprecated versus their current kind of closed source models?
So OpenAI used to be open source, like
exactly,
OG in the day. I mean, the open
that
in
was
OpenAI.
the whole point. Yeah.
But then they also did a couple open model releases either last year or the year before. The GPT OSS models, they haven't done anything open really since. Anthropic really is not for open models at all. I think because both of them are so focused on AGI, they see it as, well, they claim to see it as an issue of safety. And so like, it's not actually safe if we release these models in the open, because then they don't have our guardrails, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and I have seen something quite depressing. I think, I can't remember where I read it, but someone has released an app which allows you to essentially remove the guardrails even from closed source models, and some of the stuff that it comes up with is pretty terrifying.
Yeah, and actually that's a really big issue with open models is all the models that we kind of host have like the original guardrails in place, but you can do like further fine-tuning steps on open models to essentially remove any guardrails on them, and like, you know, you can ask them then how to build a nuclear bomb.
Yeah,
I don't know if
exactly.
it actually, you know, tells you the truth, but it'll give you an answer in a way the original models won't. And so that is a problem with open models.
Yeah. So really it's a security question more than anything else, right? Like the open versus closed debate, I guess. And potentially some efficiency or efficacy, which
So for like an actual business choosing whether to use open or closed, the framework that I would have is if you're really pushing the limits of what is possible. So let's say you're having a model run for 6 hours, doing reasoning loops, then you probably want to use a closed model. The model from 3 months ago would work for you. You're going to save 8 to 10 times as much money by using an open model. And if you want to deploy it yourself, you also get the security and sovereignty benefit as well. And then the question of like guardrails is more of a question for the ecosystem as opposed to for an individual company.
Yeah.
Because as a company, you should just, you know, use the one that has guardrails built in.
Yeah.
And use your own guardrails as well.
Be ethical, I guess is what we're saying, right? Now, you've mentioned the word a couple of times, so let's move on to this question, right? So you've described sovereign inference, GPUs that you control and deployable models as a more tractable goal than just building a domestic foundational lab. Because obviously, you know, this is what captures the certainly the political classes, you know, we should have our own, you know, we should have our own OpenAI, or, you know, why is Mistral in France and we don't have something over here, whatever. But if ministers had to choose a priority, and you have worked with Kanishka and various others on these sort of things, but so if they had to choose a priority, should the UK prioritize sovereign inference or fund a homegrown foundational lab? And what are the immediate costs and failure modes that each choice forces them into accepting?
Yeah. So there's been a lot of discourse saying that in order to get really sovereign AI, we need to be able to like train a British foundation model.
Yeah.
And I don't think that is actually what we need to do. There's a couple startups who are coming up saying we are training a British foundation model. It's disingenuous. They're fine-tuning they're fine-tuning Chinese models on the whole. They're not creating British foundation models.
They're not starting from scratch.
On the whole.
Because that would take how long?
I mean, it's just, think about how much money that OpenAI and Anthropic has raised. You need to raise that money because it's that expensive to build these kind of general purpose foundation models. So I don't think it's the right game to be playing to build a general foundation model. What I do think on the training side is a great idea is to be training kind of industry specific or models. So like for example, the British are incredibly good at like biotech.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of work that we can do to train like biotech specific models.
Out of the lab stuff, material sciences, life sciences.
So like this is what, for example, like Isomorphic Labs are doing, which is Demis's new company, and they're focusing on this use case. I think this is a use case which is still pretty greenfield, and we have like a real genuine opportunity to win in that space. So when it comes to training, I think it's disingenuous to say that we're going to have like an OpenAI or Anthropic rival in the UK, probably. Although if there was, I would love it. And I do think we should be incredibly ambitious, though, with use case specific training. When it comes to how do we get sovereignty with LLMs or reasoning models or things like that, the place where sovereignty really matters is that if something went wrong, let's say for whatever reason, we would still retain access to the AI. The thing that matters is like, let's say something awful happens, do we still have access to the AI because we are building critical infrastructure on top of that? Yeah. Having access to AI, being able to use AI is the process of inference. It's the process of running the model. I don't care if that model is trained somewhere else. As long as I can run it when things, hit the fan, that's what matters. And so building up sovereign inferencing capabilities such that I can, run it on British data centers, or at least like I have a number of allied countries' data centers that I can run it on. We know how to run the inference process well as a British state, and like we have that expertise. And as a British state, we are consuming models that we kind of have sovereign inference over is what I think matters.
So hold on a second, right? So let's think about that for a second. Let's say we are having a bit of a tiff with the US and with France and with China. Right, like the three places where
God forbid,
God forbid, where all these models are. Right, so let's say that happens and they cut off access. How would that then work? Well, without us having a homegrown.
So let's say we decided to become very isolationist and we're not talking to anyone else in the world.
How could that ever happen in the UK?
you hope not, but if that happened, I have in the UK right now the weights for every single model that I run.
Interesting.
The running of my business would not change. Now, I maybe wouldn't be able to get access to the next generation of weights and the next generation of models, but any application that I have running today would keep running. Okay. And whereas if I had a TIFF and I didn't have those open models and I didn't have those weights, all of my applications would break. Yeah. And everything that was like AI powered would stop. And so, it would stop future progress. And so we really hope that we continue to have great friends around the world.
I mean, I think we've stumbled upon the next, Cold War, right? Like, I mean, you could see a future whereby access to models potentially becomes, a political bargaining chip, right?
So this is something that I have predicted for a while, that I think if we do get to a state of like genuine AGI, that the US...
Which, by the way, do you think yes, no, possible?
Definitely.
Okay.
I think that the US probably should and would treat it as like a military grade weapon, and would almost certainly have very strict export controls on that. Yeah. And so we should not take for granted that we would continue to get as easy access to AI technology as we do now. Yeah. Now, I hope we do. And we are great friends with the US and, we're part of the Five Eyes and all these things, but it's definitely a consideration.
Yeah. And so in one, like in not in one word or one sentence, because I don't think that's possible, but in your discussions with the current government, what would you like them, A, have the first steps that they've taken, are they the right steps? And B, what are the next steps that you think they should really focus on and prioritize?
So I have had, until about a year ago, basically no interaction with the UK government, and they didn't really seem very interested.
Yes. It's something we hear all the time. Yeah.
I have been so impressed with kind of the DSIT, the Department of Science and Technology, and specifically Kanishka's team, where he's looking at AI. Ministry AI, and then the Sovereign AI unit as well. I have been so unbelievably impressed with them. The first time they asked me for a meeting, probably about 6 months ago, I didn't want to go because I thought it would be some kind of horrible civil servant, whatever.
Waste of time.
Yeah. But the person I met was a wonderful woman called Josephine Kant, who background is she's an actual VC, like a proper VC. She's in San Francisco at YC. And I was so impressed with her attitude, and every single person I've met.
I mean, they had Matt Clifford at one point, right?
They had Matt Clifford, they had James Wise, they have a very amazing team, and they are looking at this really, really, really seriously, and they're looking at it from an investor VC lens,
nice.
Which is fantastic. And they are also being very ambitious. And so
which seems to have been like, I think a lot of people would say that for the last 10, maybe even more years, the UK has not felt ambitious in the way that it did 30 years ago or 50 years ago.
I think the British government has never really done interventionism that well.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why, for example, Silicon Valley exists is because the US government is very interventionist. Silicon Valley wouldn't have existed if it weren't for a lot of US government money and US military money going into the Silicon Valley kind of companies.
This is I was on a podcast like a couple of years ago, and it was by a futurist, and he asked me, what was it that you loved when you were growing up? What was the technology that I was like, oh, Airwolf and Knight Rider, and okay, all very kind of boy kind of stuff, but and I was like, yeah, but we ended up with a car that I can use Grok on or whatever, right? And he goes, what do you think? Why do you think we didn't get to the Knight Rider or equivalent, right? I thought about it, and I hadn't really thought about it particularly hard, but I thought in the moment I was like, well, what actually became really clear, and I've had conversations since then with defense experts, is because we were at peace for an unprecedented amount of time, we stopped innovating, or the pressure to innovate was not there. And what's become really clear with all the various, skirmishes, to put it mildly, but the wars, whether that's in Russia, Ukraine, whether that's in the Middle East, whether that's elsewhere, that priority has become really salient again, and actually that the need to evolve militarily is part of that interventionist kind of paradigm that needs to happen for some of this innovation to happen. And
I think we started to see more of an interventionist government when Keir Starmer decided to step in and save British Steel. That was for example, a step. In the UK, we have not really been interventionist when it comes to our companies. We haven't said, for example, we're going to pick a winner, and this will be our global winner. We've really let, you let people merge and that's kind of
market forces,
which is fine, but every other country is picking winners. And so...
Well, France recently awarded 4 cloud contracts to homegrown companies because they want to shift reliance away from US providers, right?
There's a joke which is Emmanuel Macron is Mistral's highest performing BDR. They are so they have just decided that Mistral is going to be their winner, and who cares about anything else? The US government decides that they have kind of a certain number of winners, and that's what they do. We don't do that, and what it means is,
and China is the absolute perfect example of that,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
And so, when you're in a global economy and all your companies are competing on global stages, if everyone else is picking winners in kind of key industries, you also need to be picking winners and throwing your weight behind them. Otherwise, you will just have a lot of losers. It's better to have one winner than a bunch of losers.
Or we end up with DeepMind selling to Google at 600 million rather than...
Exactly. For example, let's say we had identified DeepMind as a strategic asset and they wanted to sell to Google because of compute. Well, the UK government should have been like, well, we'll buy you all this compute you need. It's that kind of attitude that I think we're starting to see a little bit more ambition in thinking that, we can actually maybe help these companies from DSIT than I've ever kind of experienced before.
So not to turn this into kind of political podcasts. Although we touch on lots of these issues all the time, right? But for me, I always think I've spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia. I love lots of aspects about China and what it's done and how it's transformed itself. Equally, Singapore is an example, but Malaysia, India, there's lots of examples in South and Southeast Asia. But China, for example, right, it doesn't plan a year or two ahead. It plans for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and it can do that because it's a central government. But it makes the decision, we're going to build a city here, we're going to build it. And they build it, right? No one stops them. There's no NIMBYism. There's no one in the backyard saying, and of course, from a democratic values perspective, that feels awkward. But from a okay, actually driving the economy forward perspective, yeah, sometimes maybe that's what you've got to do. And I think in the UK, we've become so scared of, upsetting any part of the electorate that we can't seem to just do stuff. But B, we are constantly fighting the next election. Like, we are 18 months into the current government having been elected, maybe 2 years. But we're already talking about leadership changes, and this was meant to be the breath of fresh air after 14 years of, you could argue, depending on your politics, which way that went. But certainly by the end, quite a tired kind of government. And I think we're very, very short-termist from a political perspective here. And we don't take the view that we should back the winner, that we should plan for, okay, what do we want the country to look like in 20 years, and tell people that for the next 5 years, that means you're going to have shit built in your backyard, or, actually a few of you are going to lose your jobs, but we'll reskill you, uptrain you, whatever, right? Because in 10 years, this is where we could end up, or where we would hope to end up. And I think we are not good at that at all. And I think in the US, I think there's a very, it's a much bigger country. So therefore, you can see different pockets of stuff happening. But yes, to your point, like, the federal government realizes what is strategic, what isn't. Where did where did GPS come from? Like, the internet. Okay, the internet was a European invention, but essentially all of these things were state funded. I'm like, I've had the founder of What 3 Words on here, and like, I've always argued that What 3 Words feels to me like something that should be a public good, right? Like, rather than something that you sell on a B2B basis or whatever. Sure. They can make their economics work. But to end this mini rant, like, I hope, and it sounds like, certainly we are early in this government, so hopefully over the next 3 years, they'll be able to prove this out further, at least in this one particular field. It sounds like you have hope that they are doing the right things at the right time.
Yeah, I think I've been very impressed with them compared with where my expectations were. Now, my expectations were low. Sure. And it's still early. The Sovereign AI Fund just got released, got announced like 3 months ago.
500 million.
Yeah. And so I'm very optimistic. I think, what I don't want to see is like flip-flopping on this. Like, if they actually have an AI strategy, I want to see them delivering it. I also should mention that, like, I was also very much in the camp of like, oh, this government's so hopeless, and like, whatever. And then I met Kanishka, and then I met the DCIT team, and I was like, these guys are doing exactly what I would want them to do. Yeah. I think they're fantastic. I think they are nailing this department's brief, but I hadn't heard about it before I met them.
Yeah, they've got a comms problem.
And so I was like, well, maybe actually this is the best run government in the history of the government, and they just haven't figured out how to message it. And I was like, that could be plausible based on my interaction. And so I'm hopeful that from the AI standpoint, also I should mention the AI Safety Institute, AISI, a feature was done on them in the New York Times this week. It's a department within the Department of Science and Technology, and is the leading light when it comes to AI safety. And so we do have institutions in this country that we should be really, really proud of when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think just to round this off, because I think it is a podcast in and of itself. I did try to get Kanishka on. So if you're listening, Kanishka, please join us. Miriam, if you could put in a good word. I do have him on WhatsApp. He just hasn't replied. But no, I think part of the problem here, very specifically in the UK, is I think the public has just become so distanced from politics. Yes, there is probably also a communications problem, but in general, there is just an attitude and an apathy towards politics now, which is like, they're all the same. None of them get anything done. My life isn't better immediately. And if my life isn't better immediately, they failed, right? And I think this is partly because of short-termism, and I think it's partly because of all these sort of things that we've just discussed. But I think what the public needs in order to get behind, and whether it's this government, another government, whoever, but for faith in politics and faith in their ability to actually ameliorate the lives of the many, they've got to see that happening with their own eyes. They've got to participate in that. And I think that's the issue, is like, you're an Oxford grad, you've got VCs on this committee or whatever it is, and it feels really remote from most people, and therefore they kind of, they're just like, wow, they're just elites kind of in it for themselves, even if the work that is being done is absolutely spectacular. So I guess the two things I would say is, if they're doing a great job, let us help them do that job as well as they can. And secondly, I think, more people should actually understand what is being done, and maybe they'd be quite surprised, because it sounds like you certainly were. The kind of last topic I want to talk about is somewhat personal to me, because I have 2 young-ish daughters. But it feels like, and especially my younger daughter, it feels like the younger generations are kind of anti-technology, not Luddite, but like, my daughter's 18. She's just finished her equivalent of A-levels, and she really detested using AI for anything, right? Like, she's like, why? I don't want to have to use it. I want to use my brain, etc., which is great. But a lot of people attribute that kind of youth distrust to the zero-sum experiences they've had in things like housing or social media, where it's like, can't get a house, everyone else can get a house, I can't, I'm out of the system, or social media, where it's like you're either have millions of followers and likes, or you're just sort of screaming into the void. When organizations push AI into schools and workplaces, what are the trade-offs that they should accept between rapid automation gains and a deepening distrust amongst Gen Z, or maybe even the generation after them? Although I think the generation after them will be, again, AI native to an extent, right? And which policy failures are the most likely to follow, do you think?
Yeah, so I've also heard, and I also do empathize a lot with this like tech phobia that you see from a lot of like millennials and also Gen Z. And I think it's completely understandable. And the reason why, so I grew up in the era of like social media was just starting to emerge as I was in high school. The experience that I have had.
So that's late 2000s, early 2010s.
Yeah. So I think I graduated high school in like 2016. Okay. And so I think Instagram came out.
Incredibly old.
Yeah,
okay,
sorry.
Yeah, thanks.
Instagram came out, I think, like sometime when I was
It was around then.
Sometime around at the end of high school.
Yeah.
Or maybe a bit before that. And the experience that my generation has had with technology has actually been overwhelmingly negative. It's been a very, very negative force for the majority of people who grew up with it. The book, The Anxious Generation, is one of my favorite books. I definitely experienced that like social media was a net negative for my life, my friends' lives, even the boys and the boys' schools' lives. It was a very, very, very bad experience. And I think a lot of us, now we're older and looking back on it, really wish we didn't have that technology in our lives. Like really think that it messed with us, and we think we lost something as part of that experience.
It's a bit like what COVID did in 2020 to a lot of people, where they lost that kind of social cohesion, and you really see that in some of the kids. Like I think my daughter would have been, what would she have been in 2020? She'd have been 13, like at the worst possible age to be like uprooted from the classroom. But what social media did in those days, and I remember because again I was a fan and using it and whatever, and at that time, for example, Twitter was the public square, and people just said all sorts of random crap on there, but it was quite a nice and happy sort of place to be. And then it kind of morphed into what it probably is more associated with now, as was Facebook, as was Instagram, etc. Right? So and those negative experiences, do you think those negative experiences happened because there was a lack of understanding of what these tools and what these products were doing, and therefore kind of usage was unfettered? Or do you think it's, well, I guess, yeah. I mean, do you think it's something else?
I think there were very few guardrails put in place for our generation. It's now clear that Meta itself knew that they were doing some things that was going to be actively harmful for especially teenage girls' mental health. And so I do think it was an overwhelmingly negative experience for a lot of people looking back. And then we combine that with the public discourse of AI being around replacing junior labor. And
which is I mean, like, I've got a 25-year-old looking for work. I mean, like, it is the most overwhelmingly depressing.
It's incredibly depressing.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of combine the fact that we probably didn't have a great experience with the last generation of tech revolution, and the fact that we look like, I say we are probably like aged out of like being a grad now, but like the grads coming up now look like they could be the brunt of what is going to happen.
Sure.
And you put that all together, and it's actually like hard to be excited by that. Yeah. It seems like a negative thing. Now, the kind of adage of like, you're not going to be replaced by AI, you're going to be replaced by someone using AI is incredibly, incredibly true. And so I understand why they have overwhelmingly negative impressions of technology. But the right way to navigate that is not to become technophobic.
Yeah.
You have to become really, really AI native in order to be able to excel in this world. But I myself am incredibly nervous about what AI will do to children. And that's why I'm very supportive of the fact that Anthropic does not allow usage of its products for under 18s, because we don't know what it does to brains that age in the way that we didn't know what social media did to my generation.
Well, you had the infinite scroll.
Yeah.
This is the infinite rabbit hole.
Yeah, and I think it's hopefully we just say this is maybe a thing that we have very supervised access to, until they're a certain age, or we have like good enough understanding. Social media we let loose on an entire population or an entire generation without understanding how bad it was, and I don't want that to happen again.
Yeah, I think, as with all of these things, right, there's going to be an adjustment period, and I'm someone who obviously I'm sat there with my kids. Like, the other day I built like a workflow to surface job alerts for very specific roles for my daughter who has like various health conditions, but also, wants to work in a very specific field. And and I showed her how I built the workflow and what she could do and how easy it is actually to do this stuff, right? And I think, to your point, it's about showing, it's about moving away from the, oh my God, you are never going to get a job because AI is going to replace everything, to okay, let's see how you can actually do the things that you love doing more, because you can now use this tool to do the stuff that you don't want to do, to replace that kind of effort. And what I would hope is, what I think we might see is a bunch of younger people, far more than certainly when you were coming out of school and university, and definitely more than when I came out of school and university. Your ability to now go out and build a small thing, right? Product, whatever it is, that you can maybe earn 50 grand a year out of, or 100 grand a year out of, or $1 million, or whatever, right? Like, it's your ability to just go out there and try stuff has never been easier. It's just amazing.
For the entrepreneurial minded, there has never been a better time to build than right now. Yeah. The costs of building are on the floor, which is just like, if you're entrepreneurially minded, this is amazing. And
even more so if you're entrepreneurially minded but don't want to build like a venture scale business, right?
Exactly.
It's amazing.
And but I also think it's important to think of entrepreneurialism on a scale. And it's not either you're an entrepreneur or you're not an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
Kanishka at some point said to me, he was like, what could you do to like move one or two rungs up the kind of entrepreneurialism ladder? So even if you don't think of yourself as that kind of person, well, just think about like, what in my life could I do to be 1 or 2% more entrepreneurial, and like see what doors that opens up for me. And there's never been a better time to do that than now. Yeah,
look, 100%. And, hopefully a message of hope and love to all of those that are kind of coming through and out of school. I think there are, I think, I've told my kids and my nieces and nephews, of which I have many and a multitude, I said, don't worry about what's happening now. By the time you guys graduate, the world's going to look different. It's going to look different again 3 to 5 years thereafter, right? Like, your biggest trait should be your adaptability, right? Like, your ability to kind of navigate various, paradigm shifts, because we will go through various paradigm shifts. Like, I was at an event last year, and this guy was wandering around. He's family office kind of guy. And he's like, I asked this question of everyone, like, when do you think the first time you're going to have a robotic football team beat a human team, right? Yeah. And I was like, I think within the next 5 to 7 years. He goes, what? Okay, I'd say 2020, I'd say 2029 on the inside, 2035 by the outside. And he's like, oh, most people say 2035 on the inside and 2045 by the outside. I'm like I'm in this space all the time. Like, I see what's happening. There is incredible things happening with robotics. I think we're in this world where things are going to happen quicker than you think, but they're going to happen differently to what you think as well, right? And I think as a result of that, adaptability, empathy, and actually I think being human becomes hugely more important in an AI-driven world than ever before. Your ability to make relationships, to leverage knowledge, to understand how to talk to people, how to be empathetic, how to sell, all of these things, I think become irreplaceable. and actually become massively valuable in a world where everyone else is just trying to figure out how do I use AI to the best of my ability. Meryem, I know you're going to have to shoot off soon, so I want to get to the last couple of questions, which I ask everyone. What is one thing that you have a contrarian conviction about from any area of life, whether that's work, politics, socially, or at home?
So as a woman in tech, I get invited to a lot of women in tech events and women in tech kinds of things. And they often frustrate me a little bit because it feels like the conversation about like, how do we get more women in tech happens at completely the wrong point in the cycle. So the conversation is like, how do we get more women to become engineers, et cetera, et cetera, which I think is great and is a very good conversation to have. However, I think the problem happens when kids are like 12.
Yeah, this is what we talked about at that event. Yeah,
and I wish we invested all of the energy that we're putting in trying to get women in tech when
they're 25.
When they're 25.
Yeah.
It's really hard to do that.
Yeah.
You're way better off spending your resources when they're 12 and 13 and getting them into tech then. I also have another kind of, I don't know how contrarian opinion it is, that I think single-sex schools are exceptional for girls. And I would be an advocate for, especially maybe sciences and maths, for those to be single-sex subjects. I went to a girls' school. Well, there was a boys' school next door.
But they were separate.
But they were all of our classes were separate.
Not anymore.
Not anymore, as I've heard. And my degree was in theoretical physics and philosophy. I very, very, very strongly believe that had I been in a mixed school, I just would have done philosophy. I don't think I would have got as into physics as I did. And part of the reason I know that is because whenever I would talk about physics with the boys on the coach, I would always feel like I was really stupid. And then we got exam results and, I beat most of them. And I was like, actually, probably all of them. And I, then was like, oh, maybe I'm not really stupid. And so I think the fact that I'm
trying to imagine 14-year-old Miriam or 15-year-old Miriam thinking that she's stupid. It doesn't compute. But
there's another backstory of like how I got into physics in the first place, but probably a conversation for the other day. And so I believe the fact that I was in a girls' school and didn't necessarily see my physics class or maths classes as gendered as like a real advantage that meant I did that. Women are massively overrepresented in subjects like biology, biochem, and medicine.
And psychology.
And things like that. And I think there are a lot of women who end up going into those subjects that if they were in single-sex schools, otherwise would have done chemistry, maths, physics.
My younger daughter is hopefully, fingers crossed, going to go off and do immunology or biological sciences in September, assuming her results come out the right way. And for the longest time, she didn't know what she was going to do, and ended up with biology because she fell in love with it kind of in her first year. But part of the reason for that was she felt like her grounding in science had not been there earlier. She also goes to a mixed school, and I think there is data, or there has been work done that proves that I think boys tend to perform better when they are in a mixed school, whereas girls tend to perform worse, right? Because boys are trying to...
Well, girls also mature a bit quicker and everything.
Yeah, sure.
And so my take is that the effort, or a lot of the effort we're putting into getting women in tech when they're 25 or 30, we need to start when they're 12 or 13. And I think part of the reason I think that is because I attribute the fact that I did physics to being in a girls' school, and I don't think I would have done physics had I not been in a girls' school.
Yeah, no, you and I have talked about this before, and quite a few of our guests have come from like an educational background over time. And just yesterday I had someone who was with an ed tech unicorn, and I've got someone coming in who I've worked with in ed tech, etc. And I have very, very strong feelings about education, but it is a universal truth that putting aside the kind of STEM side of things, if you educate girls, it is the single fastest and most efficient and effective way to lift countries out of poverty, right? And they found this throughout the kind of emerging world, emerging economies, that just educating girls just changes, the landscape completely. And finally, so we can get to know the real you, what is something that moves you personally?
So the thing that I miss the most about being at university is sitting in the cafe at my college at Oxford and speaking to a friend who was doing a completely random subject or whatever, and hearing them being so incredibly passionate about something super niche, and hearing them go off and like completely like info dump about something that they have spent a long time thinking about or are passionate about or are learning about, and seeing people be really, really, really passionate and really, really interested in things and wanting to share that makes me so happy.
Bring back the salon, that's what I say.
The salon?
Yeah.
What's the salon?
So like during the Renaissance, you had, I mean, they do exist even today, but salons were basically where your philosophers and your artists and your thinkers and your whoever's would sit, at a bar or in a restaurant or whatever, drinking wine, exchanging ideas, thoughts, etc. That kind of crucible idea. And like universities are obviously a great place for that to happen. But when you leave university, it stops because you go into a job which is all about this thing, and you lose that. I mean, like for me, this is what this podcast is. Like literally, I get to sit. I don't know how many episodes we've done, like a couple of hundred, few hundred. You know, I've had 300-ish conversations with people from like incredibly different disciplines, walks of life, etc. And it's fascinating, like sitting here listening to you talk about inference for an hour. You know, I wouldn't otherwise be doing that. And I think, salons are a great way of that happening. I think a lot of people are trying to build bigger and bigger salons, which I think, can be a bit counterproductive. But I think, if you can get 10 people, 12 people around a table with no agenda and just talk about stuff, I think it's that old thing of like, okay, well, finished dinner yet, we solved world hunger and figured out world peace. Well, maybe that can happen.
I think part of it is part of the joy is the fact that I was speaking to people who weren't doing physics or philosophy, and maybe they were telling me something about the histories of the French language or whatever they're interested in. So it's the fact that I'm learning about something completely new, and the fact that they are like such deep subject matter experts. Like they put a lot of like time and effort and craft into this, and it's very rare to come across people who really care about their craft so much to learn it really, really deeply. And seeing someone like in the full, joy of like explaining that makes me so happy.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I mean, I think curiosity and knowledge.
Kids do this.
Yeah,
kids will like completely knowledge dump everything they learn about dinosaurs on you, and you're like, I'm so happy that you love dinosaurs this much, and that's great.
It's also the best way to learn, right? Is by teaching other people, like repackaging what you've learned and explaining it to someone else. No, I think curiosity and love of knowledge. I mean, like something that I am so fortunate to have had instilled in me at a very young age, and then to go to the school that both of us went to. It was a very it whilst it wasn't quite as eclectically sort of knowledge is inspiring as I would hope. Like it certainly gave me the opportunity to explore huge numbers of different things. Like, whatever, I played the flute, the piano, I did drama for 12 years. I did all the sciences and maths and 3 languages and all the rest of it to GCSE. And then, it really did, it certainly primed me for this kind of love of eclectic knowledge. And I think to your point though, what that's turned me into is a massive generalist, and I love being a generalist. There is very little today that I go very deep into, but I do go deep where I'm interested, right? Part of that's ADHD, I think, but yeah, I think we should bring back curiosity. I think the saddest thing, not to end on a sad note, but I think there is research that shows people are losing their critical thinking skills at a astonishing rate. Part of that is social media, but it's equally and attached to that the fact that people are reading less and they're reading long form less. And I think that is something that is a real shame, because when you stop that ability, or when that atrophies, it leads to longer term systemic problems. So yeah, let's champion curiosity and let's bring back the salon. I'd be happy to run one with you if you're up for it.
Yeah.
Miriam, this has been an absolutely phenomenal conversation. Thank you so much for your time. For our audience, where can they find you online? Are you on LinkedIn or are you on Twitter? Where's the best place to find you on LinkedIn?
I'm on LinkedIn. My name's Meryem Arik. I'm on X, Twitter as well.
Yeah.
I think my handle's Meryem Arik 9.
Okay.
I think.
We'll add it to the show notes.
Yeah. I'm in all the places.
all the places all at once.
Yeah, exactly.
But never in London, apparently. Like always on a plane.
No, all the places normally in a plane.
Okay.
But Wi-Fi is now great on planes, so then I can work there. I can be on Twitter from the plane too.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was an absolute blast.
Thank you so much. Great conversation.